Several years ago, I did a video about my track saw. This is the original Makita, what they call it, SP6000K or something like that. I've had it for a very long time. The Makita came out in 2008, and I think I got it either in 2008 or beginning of 2009. So had it over 15 years, apparently. I didn't realize it's been that long. Anyway, in that video, I was talking about how, and I'll link to it if you're curious. I was talking about how at the end of a cut, I was having a problem where as you would exit the cut, the tail end of the blade was leaving these like scallop marks on the cut. And it wasn't just like a superficial hairline scratch, like it was visibly in just a little bit. And I wasn't sure why, wasn't sure what to do about it. In that video, I replaced the blade. Funny thing, some people get really bent out of shape if you don't change the blade the way they think you should change the blade. I like to take these screws off and just take the whole panel off. The thing's wide open. I don't have to try to hold it in place. It's just, I think that's easier. There were people saying, oh, you're going to strip out the screws and whatever. Like, there's like 5 screws. There's what, 60 cents in screws? If they were to ever strip out, I think I can swing that. But they're 15 years old and they look totally fine. Now, granted, previous to today, I had only changed the blade once. Anyway, that was just funny to me, the things that people get bent out of shape about. Anyhow, the point is, when I posted that video, there were some comments that were actually helpful, and then, as is always the case with YouTube, there were comments that are just garbage. There was a lot of, oh, you're holding the saw wrong. My favorite was one that said, that's literally never ever happened to me with any saw ever, as if something that hasn't happened to you can't possibly have happened to somebody else. Come on, guy. Anyway, this morning I'm in the middle of building cabinets, which you can see back here. I'll do a separate video about this. I'm finally trying to get we've been at we moved to like 2.5 years ago. That's how long I've been in this shop, and it just hasn't been a functioning shop. And so I'm working on getting that done. Those are not done. They will have doors. The orange is on purpose. Anyway, we'll talk about those another time. But working on that project, I've had a ton of plywood to cut. It's 19 feet of cabinets, wall and base. I don't know how many sheets of plywood I've gone through, but it's been a lot. And every time I was doing those cuts, there was always that little reminder of, you've really got to figure out what that problem is, or maybe it's time to get a new saw. And so this morning I was watching some reviews on different saws. I'm a little, like, I had considered the Festool since they had started this, and I've got several Festool tools, but I just really didn't want to drop that kind of money. I'm still saving up to upgrade my table saw, and so I thought, well, whatever I do, it's got to be a good balance between quality and price. I don't want to drop $1,000 on a chop saw at the moment. As I was going through these, which, by the way, I think the one I really wanted was the rigid, because I've got this thing about orange. Maybe another day. But I found a video, a couple, about this saw or the newer variants of it, where like the adjustment is basically the same regardless of which one you have. And there's a lot of discussion about toe-in, that being that the tail end of the blade being in a different position relative to the front of the blade by just very, very small amounts. Like, I think one guy was talking about like 0.15 millimeter difference, so hardly anything. And the 0.15, if I remember correctly, that supposedly came from like a Festool service manual or something. And when I saw that, I thought, well, you know, I should see if all this saw needs is just an adjustment. As I was thinking that, I started looking at the saw, and I noticed on one corner right here, it's kind of deformed a little bit, which made me think, if that is like that, there's a good chance that at some point along the way, back before that video was filmed, that I had knocked this off the table or something, and it had fallen and hit the base. And the way this saw, the way the motor unit is attached to the base unit is these 4 screws. And it's just like a friction fit, like the screws fit flat up against the recesses here. And so where this is meant to be an adjustment point, there is a certain degree of slop purposely in those screw holes so that you can adjust it. That got me thinking, maybe I just knocked it out of the plane that it was supposed to be in. And as long as I've had this saw, like, I don't remember if it had that problem in the very beginning or if that was just something that came later. I got my feeler gauges out, like I was gonna try to do the 0.15 toe in, but as I had this all loosened up and I was going to try to do that, the part of it that was tricky was figuring out, how do I actually do that? Because like the blade won't stay down to be able to measure against, and you've got these two reference faces to kind of compare it to. Anyway, it wasn't super obvious how to easily, with the tools I had on hand, considering my shop as a disaster because there's no storage yet, it's coming, how am I going to be able to get that toe in? And I had done some more looking, and I don't remember which forum it was on, but somebody had linked to, I believe it's a service manual for the Makita, and it shows you how to break down the entire saw. But one of the things it had in there, and I'll link to this, is it talked about the parallelism of the blade in relation to the path that the saw is going to be following. And what they were talking about was trying to actually get it the same. So the way I read it was no toe in, have it perfectly parallel between front and rear. So what I did is loosened all those up and tried to basically pull the base down, and then I tightened this screw just a little bit, and then I put a straight edge across, which was actually a little tricky to do because this face is not very wide. I don't know if there's like a special tool you can get to help calibrate this, but I was just using a straight edge. And I got my feeler gauges out, and this won't be the most accurate way to use a feeler gauge, but basically what I was trying to do was get them to a point where the distance between the bottom of the straight edge and the face of the blade, not along the teeth, I was trying to get it so that I had just the right amount of feeler gauges to just, it would fit, but there was just a little bit of friction. And so then I would do that on the other side, and I was just kind of moving this side up and down just a hair until it felt like the friction was the same. So not super accurate, but that's what I decided to go with, and then tightened them up. And there is a specific order these are supposed to be tightened, which is also in that manual. I believe it was upper right, bottom left, lower right, upper left, but I'll link to that. So what I decided to do is go ahead and make that even as best I could, and then do some test cuts. And I think I filmed most of those test cuts. I did a couple in plywood, which that's where this saw sees the most usage, is in plywood. And then I also did some walnut, both a rip and a cross cut. And so it is a new blade, so it cut pretty decent. I wouldn't say that it's perfect. Like, you can tell that there are scratches from the blade, just barely, but it's still pretty darn smooth. Like, I would probably glue that. I could use that as a glue joint. At most, I would maybe give it 1 or 2 passes with a block plane. So it's a decent cut. But the part that most interested me was that end of the cut, where all of a sudden, like, it looks good. So because of that, I'm not going to buy a new track saw. I'd still like one, but I need a new table saw. We're not wasting money on track saws. But I wanted to share that because that's probably actually one of my most viewed videos. And to me, it never felt complete because it was mostly showing, here's the problem I'm having, but I don't have a solution. And so you could call this a follow-up. This is part 2. This is the return. I found a way that seems to have remedied the problem. Will it work for everybody? I don't know, but I think it's worth a shot. What I don't have for you are any tips on how to orient this if you're trying to super dial it in with the feeler gauges, especially if you're trying to do the toe in. I just haven't messed with it enough to figure out a good way to do that. But I'll share the link to that service manual. And if you have this saw, if you're having that problem, hopefully it helps. It does look a lot better for me. I do have a bunch more plywood I need to cut up for this outfeed table to do some more, to do some drawers and cabinetry underneath this. So I'm going to get a lot of practice with this to see if that will really solve my problem or not. Anyway, I just wanted to share that because that's been a frustrating thing for over a decade. Well, maybe not quite a decade, but it's been a long time. I don't remember when I released the video. And I think I will do a video at some point. There's some mods I think I'm going to make to this saw. Like, it's been mostly great, but there are a couple things I don't like. One is this cord is just way too short. So I'm going to take the cord off and replace it with something longer. I don't remember what the length is, but it's not enough. I don't know if that's the same with the newer versions of this saw, but we're going to change that. I'm going to 3D print the cover for this hole here because there is always dust escaping. I know there's somebody, I can't remember the dude's name, that 3D prints those. But since I have a 3D printer, I'm going to try to make my own. So that'll be a change. I had considered trying to make a different dust port because my old dust extractor hose didn't really fit very well, but then that hose got ruined, had to replace it, and this one fits fine. So that's not going to change. The other thing I thought of is if it was a drop that happened that knocked this out of alignment, I should probably go through and check for 90 on the bevel. And I don't really do angled cuts that often with it, but it got me thinking that it would probably be a good idea to double check that 45 is actually 45 still. Anyway, that's my that's the conclusion to this saga, and I'm thankful it's got a happy ending. And hopefully there will be a bunch more videos coming up soon because I haven't done hardly any since we moved here. So I need to get back on that. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you want to see more of the stuff I do in my new shop and see how these cabinets finish up and some of the little ideas I have going in there that I think are unique, please subscribe. And if this was helpful, like it, don't like it, do whatever you want to do. We'll see you next time. Also, sugarless Mountain Dew, whether it's the diet or the zero, it's my favorite thing ever, except for